I'm Lila Torres, 27, and I never thought I'd be replaced as maid of honor at my own sister's wedding. Yet here I was, staring at the text message that would change everything. We need to talk. Coffee tomorrow at 10. Marina. The azure sky outside my classroom window sparkled like diamonds, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my chest. I'd spent my whole life in Marina's shadow, not knowing that in just a few days, everything would shift, and I'd discover who I really was when stripped of my family's approval. Before I dive into my story, let me paint you a picture of growing up Torres. My sister Marina and I were raised in a small house in East Austin by parents who sacrificed everything to give us opportunities they never had. Carmen and Luis Torres immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and a dream that their daughters would achieve what they couldn't. Marina, 2 years older than me, was everything they'd hoped for. Perfect grades, pristine bedroom, acceptance letters to prestigious universities. She followed every rule, met every expectation, and made our parents beam with pride at neighborhood gatherings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I, on the other hand, was the wild card. While Marina organized her textbooks by subject and color, my room was an explosion of art supplies, half-finished paintings, and creative chaos. At parent-teacher conferences, my teachers would say things like, "Lila has such a unique perspective," and "she thinks outside the box," which I knew were polite ways of saying I didn't fit the mold. When Marina announced she wanted to be a lawyer at age 12, our parents started saving for law school. When I announced I wanted to be an artist at 14, they started worrying about my future. "Mija," my mother would say, stirring the pot of menudo on Sunday mornings, "art is beautiful, but it doesn't pay the bills. Look at your sister. She'll be able to take care of herself, buy a house, provide for a family." Marina sailed through law school at UT, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a job at a prestigious corporate firm in downtown Austin. I chose the community college route, got my teacher certificate, and started working at Roosevelt Elementary while painting in my spare time. My parents were proud. Teaching was respectable, but I could see the worried glances when Marina talked about her latest case involving million-dollar mergers, while I shared stories about helping third graders with math. The divide widened further when Marina started dating Ethan Carlisle. Ethan came from old Austin money, the kind of family that had streets named after them and belonged to country clubs my parents had only seen from the outside. He was handsome in that polished, expensive way, with perfect teeth and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. At family dinners, he'd discuss his family's real estate investments and charitable foundations while asking me about my little art hobby with a patronizing smile. "Teaching must be so rewarding," he'd say, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "It's wonderful that some people are called to simpler pursuits." Marina would squeeze his arm and laugh, but I caught the way she'd glance at me apologetically. Still, as their relationship progressed, I watched my sister transform. Her wardrobe shifted from professional but affordable to designer labels. Her vocabulary started including phrases like "summering in the Hamptons" and "our charity gala." Most concerning was how she began adopting Ethan's subtle condescension toward anyone outside their elevated circle. "Lila, maybe it's time you considered something more substantial," she suggested during one of our increasingly rare coffee dates, eyeing my paint-stained cardigan with barely concealed disapproval. Ethan's mother sits on the board of several marketing firms. Real career opportunities, not just babysitting. "I'm not babysitting," I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I'm shaping young minds, helping kids discover their potential." She smiled that way adults smile at children with unrealistic dreams. "Of course you are." The coffee shop Marina chose for our talk should have been my first warning. Instead of our usual spot, a cozy local place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, she picked an upscaled chain downtown where everything was beige and expensive, and the baristas wore bow ties. I arrived 5 minutes early, wearing my best jeans and a clean sweater, suddenly conscious of how underdressed I felt in the sea of business suits and designer handbags. Marina swept in exactly on time, looking like she'd stepped off the pages of a legal magazine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her navy suit tailored to perfection, her heels clicking authoritatively across the marble floor. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something different now. A hardness around her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that spoke of constant pressure to maintain an image. Lila, she air-kissed both of my cheeks, a gesture that felt foreign and calculated. You look, she paused, taking in my outfit, comfortable. We ordered, hers a complicated skinny drink with multiple modifications, me a simple coffee with cream, and found a table by the window. Marina arranged herself carefully, checking her reflection in her phone screen before fixing me with what I recognized as her serious conversation face. So, she began, folding her manicured hands on the table, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. My heart fluttered with excitement. Finally, we were going to discuss maid of honor duties, color schemes, bachelorette party plans. I've been thinking about themes, I started, but she held up my hand. Actually, Lila, that's what I wanted to discuss. Ethan and I have been talking, and we've decided to make some changes to the wedding party. Changes? I said slowly. It's nothing personal, she continued, her voice taking on the practiced tone she used with difficult clients. It's just that Ethan's family has certain expectations, and we want everything to be cohesive. Cohesive, I repeated slowly. You know how important this wedding is, not just for us, but for our family's reputations. Ethan's mother sits on the board of several charity events, and this wedding will be covered in several magazines. We need everything to be perfect. I stared at my sister, searching for the girl who used to build blanket forts with me on rainy Saturday afternoons. What are you saying, Marina? She took a deep breath, like she was got to dive into cold water. We've decided to ask our cousin Diego to be the maid of honor instead. The coffee shop noise faded into a distant hum. Diego? Our male cousin Diego? He'll be the man of honor, she corrected, as if the terminology made it less of a slap in the face. He's finishing his MBA at Rice, he comes from a good family, and frankly, he photographs better. He photographs better? The words came out louder than I intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. Please don't make a scene, Marina hissed, glancing around nervously. This is already difficult enough. Difficult for whom? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a furious whisper. You're replacing me, your sister, with our cousin because I don't fit your new image? How is this difficult for you? You don't understand the pressure I'm under, she snapped, some of her polished facade cracking. Ethan's family is society royalty. His mother has made it clear that everything about this wedding will reflect on the Carlisle name. I can't afford any complications. Complications? I sat back, the word hitting me like a physical blow. That's what I am to you now? A complication? Marina's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the sister I remembered. Lila, you're artistic and free-spirited, and I love that about you. But you have to understand, you show up to family events in jeans and paint-stained clothes. You drive that beat-up Honda. You live in that tiny apartment. Ethan's family will judge not just me, but our entire family based on appearances. So you're ashamed of me? I'm not ashamed of you. I'm protecting both of us. If I can establish myself properly in Ethan's circle, I can help you too. Maybe find you a position at a better school, in a better district. I don't want your help, I interrupted, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. And I don't want to be in your perfect photogenic wedding if I'm such an embarrassment to you. Lila, please. But I was already walking away, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall in front of her. I heard her call my name once more, but I didn't turn around. The automatic doors swooshed open, releasing me into the humid Austin air, where I finally allowed myself to breathe.
I pulled out my laptop and started typing an email to my parents, then stopped. They'd just tell me to keep the peace, to support Marina's decision, to be the understanding little sister who never rocks the boat. That was my role in the Torres family dynamic, the accommodating one, the one who bends so others don't break. But maybe I was done bending. I deleted the email and instead opened a new browser window. If Marina wanted perfection, if she wanted to play in the world of Austen society and Carlisle family expectations, then perhaps it was time I learned exactly what that world was really like. After all, I might not have been raised in it, but I was smart enough to navigate it when necessary. The question was, did I want to fight for my place in Marina's wedding? Or did I want to discover who I was when I stopped trying to fit into spaces that weren't made for me? As the sun set outside my classroom windows, casting long shadows across the student desks, I realized that maybe this wasn't about the wedding at all. Maybe this was about two sisters who had grown so far apart that they no longer recognized each other. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for both of us to figure out who we really were beneath all the expectations and assumptions. I locked up my classroom and walked back to my beat-up Honda, no longer feeling ashamed of its dents and quirks. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to fight for my sister or fight for myself. But tonight, I was going home to my tiny apartment with its walls covered in my own artwork, where I could be exactly who I was without apology. The war for Marina's soul was just beginning, and I wasn't sure which one of us would survive it. 3 days after the coffee shop bombshell, I found myself sitting at my parents' dining table for our traditional Sunday dinner, pretending everything was normal while my world had tilted completely off its axis. Marina sat across from me, radiant in a pale pink sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, while Ethan held court at the head of the table like he already belonged to our family more than I did. The irony wasn't lost on me that our parents had set this table with their best dishes, the good china they'd bought piece by piece over 20 years, saving up for special occasions. Now, every Sunday had become a special occasion because Ethan Carlisle was gracing us with his presence. The venue coordinator called yesterday, Marina was saying, cutting her carne asada into perfect uniform pieces. Everything's confirmed for the Driscoll Hotel Ballroom, 600 guests, full orchestra, ice sculpture centerpieces. 600? I choked on my agua fresca. Marina, that's bigger than some concerts. The Carlisle family has extensive connections throughout Texas. Many are traveling from Dallas, Houston, even from our family's business associates in New York. It's important that we show proper hospitality. My mother beamed like Ethan had just announced he was donating a kidney to charity. Michijo, your family is so generous to include all of us in such an elegant celebration. Well, Ethan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We believe in bringing families together, though of course we want to ensure everything runs smoothly. Which reminds me, he glanced at Marina, who suddenly became very interested in rearranging her napkin. What? My father asked, sensing the shift in energy. Marina cleared her throat. We made some adjustments to the wedding party. Diego is going to be the man of honor instead of having a traditional maid of honor. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked between Marina and me, confusion clouding their faces. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. But Lila is your sister, my mother said slowly, as if explaining basic family relations to a toddler. Of course she is, Marina rushed to say, and she'll still be part of the celebration. She'll do a reading during the ceremony, something beautiful and meaningful. A reading? I finally found my voice. Like I'm some distant cousin you're trying to include out of obligation? Lila, please, Marina's voice carried a warning edge. Let's not ruin dinner. But the dam had burst. Ruin dinner? Marina, you've replaced me in your wedding without even discussing it with our parents. You've decided I'm not good enough to stand beside you on the most important day of your life, and you think I'm ruining dinner? That's not what this is about, Marina snapped, her composure finally cracking. This is about understanding that some situations require certain presentations. Presentations? My father's voice was dangerously quiet. Luis Torres was a gentleman, but when his family was threatened, something steely emerged. Michi, what are you talking about? Ethan leaned forward, his charming mask slipping to reveal something calculating underneath. Mr. Torres, perhaps you can help your daughter understand that this wedding represents more than just a personal celebration. My family's reputation, our business connections, the social implications, everything must be carefully coordinated. And Lila doesn't coordinate? My mother's voice was getting sharper. Mrs. Torres, please don't misunderstand. Ethan's tone was patronizingly gentle. Lila is artistic, creative, but creativity doesn't always translate well to formal occasions. We need someone who understands the social requirements, who can navigate the expectations of our guests. You mean someone richer, I said flatly. I mean someone appropriate, he replied without flinching. The word hung in the air like a slap. My parents stared at Ethan, then at Marina, who was studying her plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Marina, my father said quietly, is this what you want? For a moment, just a moment, I saw my real sister flicker across her face, uncertain, scared, torn between two worlds. But then she lifted her chin with that stubborn Taurus pride and said, I want what's best for everyone involved. What's best? I repeated, standing up from the table. Or what looks best? Lila, Marina said. But no, Marina, you've made your choice. You've chosen to be embarrassed by your own family because we don't fit into Ethan's world. Fine, but don't pretend this is about what's best for anyone except your social climbing ambitions. I turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped me cold. You know, Lila, this attitude is exactly why you weren't the right choice. A wedding party member needs to be supportive, gracious, willing to put the couple's needs first, but you've always been difficult.
I spun around to face him, fury blazing through my chest. Difficult or honest? Because there's a difference between supporting someone and enabling them to throw away everything that actually matters. And what matters to you? Ethan asked with genuine curiosity, as if studying an interesting specimen. Your little art projects? Your teaching job that barely pays rent? Your complete lack of ambition beyond finger painting with children? The insult hit its mark, and I saw him register my flinch with satisfaction. But before I could respond, my father stood up. That's enough. Luis Torres wasn't a large man, but something about his presence suddenly dominated the room. Ethan, you are a guest in my house. You will not speak to my daughter that way. Dad, please, Marina started, but he held up a hand. No, mija. I've listened quietly while you've changed. Watched you become someone I barely recognize. But I will not sit at my own table and watch my family be torn apart by someone who thinks his money makes him better than us. Ethan's face flushed red. Mr. Torres, I think you're misunderstanding. I understand perfectly, my father continued, his voice deadly calm. You think because Lila doesn't wear designer clothes and drive a fancy car, she's not good enough for your family. But let me tell you something about my youngest daughter. She gets up every morning and shapes young minds. She turns children's nightmares into dreams with art therapy. She works 2 jobs to pay for art supplies for kids whose parents can't afford them. She has never asked us for money, never complained about working hard, never looked down on anyone because of what they have or don't have. He turned to Marina, and I saw tears in his eyes. Lila is not the problem here, mija. The problem is that you've forgotten who you are and where you come from. Marina's composure finally shattered. I haven't forgotten anything. I'm trying to build something better, something bigger than this little house and Sunday dinners and pretending that love is enough to pay bills. And what's wrong with this house? My mother asked softly. What's wrong with Sunday dinners? What's wrong with love? The question hung in the air as Marina realized what she'd just said.
Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away, looking around the dining room as if seeing it for the first time. The family photos covering every surface, the carefully maintained furniture that had lasted decades, the warmth that money couldn't buy. "I have to go," she whispered, grabbing her purse and practically running for the door. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Ethan followed, but paused at the threshold. "This conversation isn't over," he said, looking directly at me, "and neither is the situation." After they left, the three of us sat in stunned silence. My mother quietly began clearing plates, her movements mechanical and tired. My father stared at the door Marina had fled through, his shoulders sagging under some invisible weight. "Mijo," my mother finally said to me, "are you okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer. Was I okay? My sister had chosen status over family. My future brother-in-law had just revealed himself to be everything I'd suspected and worse. My parents were heartbroken. But underneath all that pain, something else was stirring. A fierce determination I hadn't felt in years. "I will be," I said finally. "But first, I need to figure out exactly who Ethan Carlisle really is." Monday morning found me in the most unlikely place, the reference section of the Austin Public Library, surrounded by society magazines, newspaper archives, and my laptop open to multiple tabs of social media profiles. If Marina was determined to marry into Austin high society, I was going to learn everything there was to know about the world she was so desperate to join. Jonah found me there at noon, buried under a pile of magazines with names like Austin Society and Texas Elite, looking like a detective solving a cold case. "Please tell me you're not planning to show up at the wedding in a wedding dress to object during the ceremony?" he asked, sliding into the chair across from me. "Better," I replied, not looking up at an article about the Carlisle family's charitable foundation. "I'm going to find out exactly what Marina is marrying into." "And what have you discovered about the illustrious Carlisle dynasty?" I leaned back in my chair, stretching my neck. "Did you know that Ethan's family made their fortune in the 1950s by buying up land from Mexican-American families during desegregation? They'd offer cash payments that seemed generous, but were actually far below market value, then develop luxury neighborhoods that the original families couldn't afford to live in." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "That's unfortunately not uncommon for old Texas money." "It gets better," I continued, pulling up a newspaper article on my laptop. 3 years ago, Ethan's uncle was investigated for predatory lending practices targeting immigrant families. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the investigation found evidence of deliberately confusing contracts designed to force families into foreclosure. Yikes! "And last year," I said, warming to my subject, "the Carlisle Foundation, which Ethan sits on the board of, was criticized for donating money to build a community center in East Austin, then lobbying the city to change zoning laws that would force out the low-income families who actually used it." Jonah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Lila, even if all of this is true, Marina won't want to hear it. She's invested in seeing Ethan and his family as her ticket to a better life." "But what if it's not just about Ethan?" I asked. "What if there's something specific about this wedding, this timing, this desperate need for everything to be perfect?" That's when I found it. Buried in a Business Journal article about the Carlisle Bank's expansion plans was a small mention that made my blood run cold. The bank was in the final stages of acquiring several smaller community banks throughout Texas, but the deal required approval from the State Banking Commission. One of the commissioners, it turned out, was particularly concerned about the Carlisle family's community reputation and had specifically cited their commitment to Texas values and family traditions as a factor in the approval process. "Jonah," I said slowly, "what if this wedding isn't just about Marina's social climbing? What if it's about Ethan's business interests?" I showed him the article, watching his expression change as he read. "You think he's using Marina to improve his family's image?" I think he needs to appear stable, committed to family values, connected to the Latino community that his family has historically exploited. And what better way to do that than to marry a smart, successful Latina lawyer whose family represents everything wholesome and traditional? But Marina is smart, Jonah protested. She's not some naive girl who can be manipulated. Isn't she, though? I interrupted. Think about it. She spent her whole life trying to prove she belongs in spaces that weren't made for people like us. Ethan shows up offering her everything she's ever wanted: status, wealth, acceptance, and all she has to do is be the perfect accessory to his perfect life. We spent the next hour combing through more articles, social media posts, and business filings. The picture that emerged was troubling. Ethan Carlisle wasn't just wealthy and privileged, he was calculating, strategic, and had a pattern of using people to achieve his goals. Okay, Jonah said finally, let's say you're right. Let's say Ethan Carlisle is using Marina for his own purposes. What are you going to do about it? I stared at the evidence scattered across the table, feeling the weight of what I'd discovered. I'm going to tell her the truth. And if she doesn't believe you, then at least I'll know I tried to save my sister before she marries someone who sees her as a business asset instead of a person. I found Marina at her law firm that evening, working late as usual in her glass-walled office on the 20th floor. Through the windows, Austin sparkled below us like a circuit board, all lights and possibilities. She looked up when I knocked, surprise and wariness flickering across her face. "Lila? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk without waiting for an invitation. "If this is about Sunday dinner, it's about Ethan," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and the printed articles I'd gathered. "Marina, you need to listen to me. Really listen before you make a mistake you can't undo." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "A mistake? Marrying the man I love is a mistake? Marrying a man who's using you is." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything I'd discovered: the predatory lending, the community displacement, the suspicious timing of their engagement with the banking commission vote. Marina listened in silence, her expression growing more closed off with each revelation. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. "Are you done?" she asked finally. "Marina, did you hear what "I heard every word," she said, turning back to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, distant, almost pitying. "And do you know what I think?" she said. "I think you're jealous." The words hit me like a physical blow. Jealous? "You've always resented my success, the fact that I got out of East Austin while you stayed behind, content with your little life and your little dreams. And now that I'm about to marry someone who can give me everything I've ever wanted, status, wealth, acceptance, and all I have to do is be the perfect accessory to his perfect life. So you spend your day digging up gossip and conspiracy theories, trying to convince me that the man I love is some kind of villain. Well, congratulations, Lila. You've proven exactly why Ethan was right about you." "Right about me?" Marina stood up, walking to the window with her back to me. "He said you'd do this. He said you tried to sabotage our relationship because you can't handle seeing me happy. He said your type always tries to drag successful people back down to their level." "My type?" The words came out as a whisper. People who are content with mediocrity. People who think there's something noble about staying small, staying poor, staying exactly where they were born, instead of trying to build something better. I stared at my sister's reflection in the window, this woman who looked like Marina but sounded like a stranger. "Is that really what you think of me?" She turned around and for a moment her mask slipped. I saw uncertainty, fear, maybe even regret. But then she lifted her chin with that stubborn Taurus pride. "I think you need to decide whether you want to be part of my new life or not. Because I'm not going backwards, Lila. I'm not going to stay small to make you feel better about your choices. And what if I'm right? I asked, standing up to face her. What if Ethan is using you? What if this perfect life you think he's offering comes at a price you're not ready to pay? Then that's my choice to make, she said firmly. My life, my decision, my consequences. I gathered my papers, feeling older and more tired than I had in years. You're right, I said, heading toward the door. It is your choice. But, Marina, when you wake up one day and realize that you've traded everything real for something that just looks good in photographs, don't say I didn't warn you. I was almost to the elevator when her voice stopped me. Lila. I turned back to see her standing in her office doorway, silhouetted against the city lights. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry it has to be this way. No, I replied, pressing the button for the elevator. You're sorry it can't be easy. There's a difference. As the elevator doors closed, I saw my reflection staring back at me. Paint under my fingernails, discount store clothes, wild hair that refused to be tamed. For the first time in my life, instead of seeing someone who didn't quite fit, I saw someone who was exactly who she was supposed to be. The war for Marina's soul was far from over, but I was finally ready to fight it on my own terms. The week after my disastrous confrontation with Marina, I threw myself into the end-of-summer activities at Roosevelt Elementary. If I couldn't save my sister from making the biggest mistake of her life, at least I could focus on something that actually mattered. I was setting up art stations for our annual community paint day when Priya Sharma found me in my classroom.
Priya had been Marina's college roommate and was still set to be a bridesmaid, despite the increasingly toxic wedding planning atmosphere. She stood in my doorway looking uncharacteristically nervous, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. Lila, do you have a minute? I looked up from the stack of paintbrushes I was organizing, surprised to see her. Priya, hey, what brings you to the elementary school circuit? I wanted to talk to you about Marina, she said, closing the door behind her. Can we sit? We settled into two of the tiny student chairs, our knees practically touching our chins. Priya took a deep breath before speaking. She's not herself, Lila. I mean, I know she's always been ambitious, but this is different. She's scared all the time. Anxious. She called me crying last night because she couldn't decide between two virtually identical centerpiece options, and when I suggested she just pick one, she had a complete meltdown about how everything had to be perfect or Ethan's mother would think she was common. I set down my paintbrushes, giving Priya my full attention. How long has this been going on? It's gotten worse since the engagement, but honestly, it started when she began dating Ethan. She second-guesses everything now. Her clothes, her vocabulary, even the way she laughs. She practices conversations before family dinners with his parents. Practices conversations? She has note cards, Lila, talking points about art, literature, current events that she thinks will make her sound sophisticated. She's turned herself into a performance. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same one I'd carried since childhood when I watched Marina struggle to be perfect. Why are you telling me this? Priya was quiet for a moment, spinning her coffee cup between her hands. Because yesterday, Ethan's mother took us wedding dress shopping. And when Marina tried on the dress she'd originally fallen in love with, this beautiful, simple gown that looked stunning on her, Mrs. Carlisle made one comment about how minimalist styles can sometimes read as unsophisticated, and Marina immediately switched to this elaborate, expensive monstrosity that she clearly hated but thought would impress people. And when I suggested maybe she should wear what made her happy, she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. She said happiness wasn't the point. Impression was. That's not the Marina I went to law school with, Lila. That's not your sister. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the playground where kids would soon be running around, completely themselves in ways that adults forgot how to be. I tried to tell her about Ethan's family history, about some questionable business practices. She thinks I'm jealous. Are you? The question caught me off guard. I turned to face Priya, really considering it. You know what?
maybe I am jealous, not of the money or the status, but how easy it is for her to just decide to be someone else. To look at her life and think it's not good enough, then systematically erase everything that made her who she was. That's not jealousy, Priya said gently. That's grief. You're mourning the sister you're losing. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Radio Coffee on Whitaker. Come alone. A friend of the family. I showed Priya the message and we exchanged confused glances. That's weird. Are you going to go? I guess we'll find out. Radio Coffee was busy with the usual mix of students, remote workers, and Austin hipsters, but I spotted him immediately in the corner booth. Diego Torres, our cousin, looked uncomfortable in his designer polo shirt and khakis, clothes that clearly weren't his usual style. When he saw me approaching, relief flooded his face. Lila, thank God you came. I slid into the booth across from him, studying his expression. Diego was 2 years older than Marina, had always been more like a brother than a cousin, and was one of the most genuinely kind people I knew. Seeing him looking this stressed was unsettling. Diego, what's going on? And why all the cloak and dagger texting? He glanced around nervously before leaning across the table. I need to tell you something, but first you have to promise me that you'll be careful with this information. Careful how? Just promise me, Lila, this is bigger than family drama. I nodded, and he took a shaky breath before continuing. I didn't want to be Marina's man of honor. I told them no when they first asked. Then why? Because Ethan's mother made me an offer I couldn't refuse, literally couldn't refuse. Diego's hands were trembling slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. She said if I agreed to replace you, they'd invest in the community center project I've been trying to get funding for. $2 million, Lila. $2 million to build a community center in the neighborhood where we grew up. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Diego. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was what she said would happen if I refused. She said that Carlisle family has significant influence with the bank that holds the mortgage on my parents' house. She said it would be unfortunate if there were any complications with their loan renewal. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She threatened your parents' house? Not in so many words, but yeah. And Lila, my parents are already struggling. Dad's been out of work since his back injury, and Mom's hours got cut at the hospital. If they lost their house? Oh my God. I stared at my cousin, seeing not just his fear, but his shame at being manipulated. Diego, Marina doesn't know, does it? How could I tell her? She's so happy, so excited about this wedding. And besides, his voice dropped, I don't think she'd believe me. She's completely under their spell. We have to tell her. With what proof? Mrs. Carlisle is too smart to put threats in writing. It's all verbal, all implications and suggestions. And meanwhile, Marina thinks I'm thrilled to be part of her perfect wedding. I set down my paintbrushes, giving Priya my full attention. There has to be something we can do. Some way to expose what they're really like.
Diego looked around the coffee shop again, then pulled out his phone. Actually, there might be. Remember how I'm studying business at Rice? Well, I've been doing some research on the Carlisle Bank's lending practices for a class project on ethical banking. He opened a folder on his phone and showed me a spreadsheet filled with numbers and addresses. These are properties they foreclosed on in the last 5 years. Notice anything? I scanned the list, seeing address after address in East Austin, South Austin, and other predominantly Latino neighborhoods. They're all in minority communities. 93%, Diego confirmed. And here's the interesting part. Most of these properties were then sold to development companies owned by, guess who? Carlisle family shell corporations. Exactly. They're not just predatory lenders, Lila. They're running a systematic operation to displace Latino families from neighborhoods that are being gentrified, then profiting from the development. This is it, I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This is what we need to show Marina. But it has to be done carefully, Diego warned. If the Carlisle family finds out I'm the source of this information, they won't, I promise. But Diego, we can't let Marina marry into this family without knowing the truth. Even if she chooses to go through with it, she deserves to make an informed decision. And what about my parents' house? What about the community center funding? I reached across the table and squeezed his hand.
We'll figure something out, but we can't let fear of what might happen stop us from doing what's right. Diego stared at his phone screen for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been relief. You know what? I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of letting people like the Carlyles hold power over families like ours. So what do you want to do? I want to fight back, but we're going to need help. That's when I thought of the one person who knew Marina better than anyone, who had the credibility to make her listen, and who had been suspiciously absent from all the wedding planning drama. We need to call Grandmother Rosa. Grandmother Rosa lived in the same small house in East Austin where she'd raised 5 children, including our father. At 82, she was still sharp as a tack, fierce as a rattlesnake when protecting her family, and completely unimpressed by money or status. If anyone could get through to Marina, it would be her. I found her in her backyard garden that Saturday morning, tending to the tomato plants that were her pride and joy. She looked up when she heard the back gate creak, unsurprised to see me despite the fact that I hadn't called ahead. "Mija," she said, straightening slowly and wiping her hands on her apron. "You look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders." "Abuela, we need to talk about Marina." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "The wedding that's tearing our family apart. Come, sit with me." We settled onto her back porch, the same one where she'd told me stories and taught me card games throughout my childhood. The morning sun filtered through the old oak tree, casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden boards. "Tell me," she said simply. I told her everything. The replacement as maid of honor, the investigation into the Carlyle family's business practices, Marina's transformation, Diego's situation, the threats and manipulation. Grandmother Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring out at her garden. "Your sister is not the first Torres woman to believe that changing herself will bring her happiness, but she is the first to forget that our strength comes from knowing who we are, not from pretending to be someone else." I don't know how to reach her anymore, Abuela. She thinks I'm jealous, that I'm trying to hold her back. "Maybe," Grandmother Rosa said, "it's time she remembered what happens when we abandon our family for people who will never truly accept us." She stood up with more energy than I'd seen from her in years. "Go home, mija. Tomorrow is Sunday dinner, yes? Marina and her young man will be there?" "I think so. Why?" "Because it's time for someone to tell some truths that need telling. And I think it's time for Marina to hear some stories about her grandmother's first marriage." "Your first marriage?" "Oh yes, mija. Before your grandfather, I was engaged to a wealthy Anglo man who promised me a life of luxury if I would just adjust myself a little bit. Change my name, speak less Spanish, distance myself from my family's more ethnic traditions." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I was so young, so eager to escape poverty, I almost made the same mistake your sister is making now." "What happened?" "I realized that a man who was ashamed of where I came from would eventually become ashamed of who I was, and I decided I'd rather be poor and proud than rich and hollow." She looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen decades of struggle and triumph. "But your sister hasn't learned that lesson yet. Maybe it's time she did." Sunday dinner arrived with all the tension of an impending storm. Marina and Ethan sat at the family table looking like they were posing for a magazine photo shoot, while the rest of us tried to navigate the minefield of casual conversation. My parents were polite but distant with Ethan, still wounded from his comments the previous week. Grandmother Rosa had arrived early and spent the afternoon cooking, filling the house with the familiar smells of her mole and fresh tortillas. She moved around the kitchen with quiet purpose, preparing not just food, but some kind of reckoning. "Ethan," she said as we all settled around the table, "Marina tells me you're from an old Austin family." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with his most charming smile. "The Carlyles have been in Texas for several generations." "How interesting. And what did your family do during the Mexican-American War?" The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure I follow." "Oh, it's simple history," Grandmother Rosa said, ladling mole onto his plate with perfect hospitality. "My family has been in Texas since before it was Texas. We were here when it was Mexico, when it became a republic, when it joined the United States. I'm curious about your family's role during those transitions." Marina shifted uncomfortably. Abuela, maybe we could talk about something more current? Oh, but history is always current, mija. It shapes everything we do today. Grandmother Rosa's smile was sweet as honey and twice as dangerous. For instance, did you know that in 1952, a developer named Carlyle bought my sister's house in East Austin for a fraction of its value? Told her the neighborhood was being condemned for a highway project that never happened. Then he built luxury homes on the land and sold them to wealthy Anglos moving to the city. The table went dead silent. Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Of course, Grandmother Rosa continued conversationally, that was probably a different Carlyle. There are so many wealthy families with similar names, it's hard to keep track. Actually, Ethan said carefully, that would have been my grandfather, Charles Carlyle, but I'm sure there were legitimate reasons. Oh, I'm sure there were, Grandmother Rosa agreed. Just like there were legitimate reasons when another Carlyle company bought out the small grocery store where my husband worked for 30 years, promised to keep all the employees, then fired them the next week to hire cheaper labor. Marina looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Abuela, please. And I suppose there were legitimate reasons when a Carlyle bank foreclosed on the Mendoza family's bakery last year, even though they'd never missed a payment, something about changing lending requirements that somehow only applied to Latino-owned businesses. Ethan set down his fork with deliberate control. Mrs. Torres, I understand you may have concerns about my family's business practices, but I can assure you that everything we do is completely legal. Legal and right aren't always the same thing, mijo, Grandmother Rosa said gently. But that's not really what I wanted to discuss. She turned to Marina with an expression of profound sadness. What I wanted to discuss was how much it hurts to watch my granddaughter erase herself for someone who will never love her as much as he loves what she can do for him. That's not, Marina started, but her voice caught. Marina, you think changing yourself will make you worthy of love. But mija, anyone who asks you to be less than who you are doesn't deserve the gift of your true self. I'm not changing myself, Marina said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I'm just growing, evolving. Into what? Into someone who's ashamed of her sister? Ashamed of her family? Ashamed of the very qualities that made you strong enough to survive law school and build a career? Marina's eyes filled with tears, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I'm building a better life. Better for whom? Because the Marina I raised would never throw away her sister for a man's approval. The Marina I raised knew that family isn't something you discard when it becomes inconvenient. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, quietly, Ethan spoke. I think we should leave. Yes, Grandmother Rosa said, never taking her eyes off Marina. As they gathered their things to go, Marina paused at the door. For just a moment, she looked back at our family gathered around the table, and I saw something break in her expression, a recognition of what she was walking away from. But then Ethan's hand was on her back, guiding her out the door, and the moment was lost. After they left, Grandmother Rosa sat back down at the table and calmly continued eating her dinner. Did it work? I asked. Seeds were planted, she said simply. Now we wait to see if they grow. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Carlyle Estate's bridal suite, casting everything in golden light that should have felt magical. Instead, the air crackled with tension as Marina sat rigidly in front of an ornate vanity, her hands trembling as the makeup artist attempted to apply her foundation for the third time. I can't do this, Marina whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos surrounding her. Wedding planners rushed in and out, florists argued about centerpiece heights in the hallway, and Abigail Carlyle's sharp voice could be heard downstairs, directing caterers with military precision. Priya exchanged worried glances with the other bridesmaids, who all had been tiptoeing around Marina's increasingly fragile state for the past hour. The bride, who had meticulously planned every detail of this day for 18 months, was falling apart, and no amount of concealer could hide the panic in her eyes. Marina, honey, you just have pre-wedding jitters, Priya said gently, reaching out to squeeze her friend's shoulder. Every bride gets nervous. No, you don't understand, Marina said cracked, as she pushed away from the vanity, her half-finished makeup making her look like a broken doll. I've made a terrible mistake. Not about Ethan, about everything. About Lila, about what matters. The mention of my name sent a ripple of uncomfortable silence through the room. Everyone knew the story by now, how Marina had replaced me with our cousin Diego as maid of honor, how our family had fractured over the decision, and how I'd refused to attend the wedding at all despite our parents' pleading. What they didn't know was that I was currently sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic in the estate's circular driveway, having driven 4 hours through the night after receiving a frantic call from Jonah.
She's losing it, Lila, he'd said, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine concern. Priya called me because she didn't know what else to do. Marina keeps asking for you, but she's too proud to call herself. I'd stared at my phone for a full 5 minutes after hanging up, torn between the satisfaction of being proven right about this ridiculous wedding and the deeper pull of family loyalty that I'd never quite been able to shake. In the end, it was Grandmother Rosa's voice in my head that decided for me. Family isn't about being perfect, mija. It's about showing up when it matters most. Now, sitting outside the imposing stone mansion where my sister was supposed to marry into American aristocracy, I questioned my impulse. Through the windows, I could see figures moving frantically, and I wondered if I was already too late to fix whatever had broken. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonah. She locked herself in the bathroom. Even Diego can't get her to come out. Please. I took a deep breath, grabbed the emergency kit I'd packed on pure instinct, tissues, safety pins, stain remover, and my grandmother's rosary, and walked toward the house I'd sworn I'd never enter. The front door was answered by a harried-looking wedding planner who barely glanced at me before waving me inside. "Are you at the catering staff? Because the ice sculpture is melting faster than expected and—" "I'm the bride's sister," I said simply, and watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been relief. Oh, you're... But I thought... Mr. Carlyle said... Where is she?" The woman pointed toward the grand staircase with a shaking hand. "Second floor, bridal suite, but she's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out for anyone." I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding with each step. Whatever had happened up there, whatever had finally broken through Marina's perfect facade, I had a feeling it was about more than cold feet. The bridal suite was in chaos when I entered. Priya practically collapsed with relief when she saw me, while the other bridesmaids stared like I was a ghost. Diego, looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting tuxedo, stepped forward with an apologetic expression. "Lila, I'm so sorry about all this. I never wanted to take your place. I told Marina it wasn't right, but she insisted." "Don't worry about it," I said, meaning it. This was bigger than wounded pride now. "Where is she?" He gestured toward the closed door where I could hear muffled sobbing. I knocked gently. "Marina, it's me." The crying stopped abruptly. "Lila?" "Yeah, can I come in?" There was a long pause, then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened to reveal my sister sitting on the marble floor in her elaborate wedding dress, mascara streaking down her cheeks, looking nothing like the poised bride she'd planned to be. I stepped inside and closed the door behind us, creating our first truly private moment in over a year. "You came," she whispered. "You're my sister," I said, sitting down beside her despite the risk to my jeans from the pristine white fabric pooled around us. "What happened?" Marina's carefully constructed composure crumbled completely. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know. This morning, Ethan's mother cornered me about the seating chart. She said she was glad we'd upgraded the wedding party because having you as the maid of honor would have sent the wrong message to their friends." My jaw tightened, but I stayed quiet. "And I just stood there and agreed with her, Lila. I nodded and smiled and said you wouldn't understand the significance of the role anyway." Fresh tears started flowing. "When did I become someone who talks about my own sister like that?" "When you decided their approval mattered more than mine," I said,
not unkindly but honestly. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You're right, God, you're right. I've been so caught up in this world in impressing people who will probably never really accept me anyway, that I lost sight of what actually matters. Which is family. Real love. People who know the worst parts of you and stay anyway. You know the worst parts of me, and you're here.
We sat in silence for a moment, 18 months of hurt and misunderstanding settling around us like dust. I was so jealous of you, Marina continued quietly. You never cared what anyone thought. You just painted your weird, beautiful paintings and taught your kids and lived your life exactly how you wanted to live it. Meanwhile, I was killing myself trying to be perfect for everyone else. I cared what you thought, I admitted. It hurt when you chose his family over ours. I know. I'm sorry. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. I don't know how to fix this, Lila. The wedding is in 3 hours. Everyone's here. His parents will disown him if we cancel, and my career will be over if I embarrass the firm like this. I studied my sister's face, seeing past the smeared makeup to the scared, confused woman underneath. Do you love him? Yes, I think so, but not the way he wants me to love him. He wants someone who'll disappear into his world completely, and I can't do that anymore. Then don't. It's not that simple, isn't it? I stood up and helped her to her feet. Look, I can't tell you whether to marry Ethan or not, but I can tell you that you're Marina Torres, and you're strong enough to live your life on your own terms, whatever those are. She stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, taking in the ruined makeup and wrinkled dress. I look like a disaster. You look like someone who's finally being honest with herself. I opened my emergency kit. Lucky for you, I came prepared for disasters. For the next hour, I worked magic with concealer and safety pins while Marina told me everything. How Ethan had gradually isolated her from friends he deemed unsuitable, how his mother had rewritten half the wedding to better reflect Carlisle traditions, how she'd slowly lost herself in the pursuit of belonging to a world that would never truly accept her. I kept telling myself it was worth it, the security, the status, the approval. But sitting here now, I realized I gave up the one person whose approval actually mattered to me. You didn't give me up completely, I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. I'm here. When we emerged from the bathroom, the bridal suite had been transformed from chaos to calm efficiency. Priya had taken charge, directing the photographer and organizing the other bridesmaids. Diego approached us tentatively. I should step back now, shouldn't I? He said to Marina. She nodded, then looked at me. That is, if you're willing to take your rightful place back. I looked around the room at the expensive flowers, the designer dresses, the world my sister had tried so hard to join. Only if you're sure this is what you want. All of it. Marina was quiet for a long moment, then nodded with more certainty than I'd seen from her in months. I want to marry Ethan, but I want to do it as myself, not as some version of me that his family finds acceptable, and I want my sister by my side. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of final preparations. I helped Marina into a simpler, more beautiful version of her hairstyle, one that actually suited her face instead of matching the elaborate style Abigail Carlisle had insisted upon. We switched out some of the more ostentatious jewelry for pieces that had belonged to our grandmother. As we prepared to leave for the ceremony, Marina caught my hand. Whatever happens down there, whatever his family says or does, promise me you won't leave. I promise. The ceremony itself was a study in contrasts. The Carlisle side of the aisle sat in perfectly coordinated pastels, their faces showing various degrees of disapproval as they took in Marina's downgraded appearance and my presence. Our side was smaller but warmer, our parents beaming with relief that their daughters were together again. Ethan's face, when he saw Marina walking down the aisle, was complicated, love mixed with confusion as he took in the changes she had made. But when she reached him and spoke her vows in her own words, rather than the traditional script his mother had selected, something shifted. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked at my sister like he was seeing her rather than his image of her. The reception was where the real drama unfolded. Abigail Carlisle cornered me at the bar, her smile sharp enough to cut glass.
I must say, I'm surprised to see you here after everything. Family is full of surprises, I replied evenly.
Yes. Well, I hope you understand that Marina has obligations now, social expectations that may not align with your lifestyle. I smiled back, just as sharp. I understand that Marina is lucky to have people who love her exactly as she is. That's actually pretty rare in some circles. Before she could respond, Marina appeared at my side, having clearly overheard the exchange. Mrs. Carlyle, I was just telling the mayor's wife about Lila's work. Did you know she's having a solo show at the Riverside Gallery next month? I'm so proud of her success. Abigail's smile faltered slightly. How lovely, isn't it? I was thinking we should host a small gathering to celebrate. Nothing too fancy, just family and real friends. The emphasis on real wasn't lost on anyone. Abigail excused herself with icy politeness, and Marina turned to me with a grin that reminded me of the sister I'd grown up with. That felt good, she admitted. It looked good on you. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marina found me on the garden terrace where I was getting some air. So, she said, joining me at the stone railing, what happens now? Now you go on your honeymoon and figure out how to be married while staying yourself. And us? I considered this. The hurt from the past year wouldn't disappear overnight. But sitting here with my sister, seeing her fight for herself and for us, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. We rebuild, I said finally. Slowly, honestly. No more pretending to be people we're not. She nodded, then pulled something from her bouquet, a small white rose she had apparently saved. I know it's traditional for the bride to throw the whole bouquet, but I wanted you to have this. Not because of what it's supposed to mean about marriage or anything, but because... She struggled for words. Because you saved me today. Not just from a bad wedding, but from losing myself completely. I took the rose, its petals soft between my fingers. You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were. Promise me something? What? Promise me we won't let anyone else's expectations come between us again. Whatever happens with Ethan's family, whatever pressure comes, we stick together. I promise. As I drove home that night, the rose carefully placed in a cup of water on my passenger seat, I thought about victory and what it really meant. I'd thought winning would feel like vindication, like proving I was right about Marina's choices. Instead, it felt like getting my sister back. My phone buzzed with a text from Marina. Thank you for being the sister I needed, not the one I deserved. I smiled and typed back, see you for coffee next week. We have a lot to catch up on. The highway stretched out ahead of me, dark except for my headlights and the occasional passing car. In the distance, I could see the lights of home, where Jonah was probably waiting with ice cream and the desire to hear every detail of the day. I'd gone to that wedding expecting nothing and hoping for very little. Instead, I'd found something I thought was lost forever. My sister. Not the polished version she'd tried to become, but the real Marina who'd stayed up all night helping me with art projects and defended me when kids at school called my paintings weird. Sometimes the best victories aren't about defeating someone else, but about refusing to let them defeat you. Today, Marina and I had both won something much more valuable than any argument. We'd won each other back. The rose beside me caught the light from a passing street lamp, and I pressed down a little harder on the accelerator, eager to get home and start this new chapter of being sisters again.